Okay, calm down. You got limits, man. You got limits, man. Okay, calm down.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Katie Halper Show. Just going to adjust my mic. Welcome. Sorry about the delayed starting time. We had some tech issues, but good things come to those who wait, and that good thing is a great show. So before we start the show, want to invite everyone to give this show a thumbs up because that's a great way to support this show for free. Also, subscribe if you haven't already subscribed. And guess what? We have an announcement. We have reached 250,000 subs. Yay. So thank you so much to everyone who has subscribed. And we are going to be talking during the second half of the show with Jamie Peck and Sam Beard. They have some great announcements that they're going to share about Luigi Mangione. But our first segment is going to focus on something different. Now, before I start that, though, please do remember that we highly encourage you to become Patreon supporters. That makes this show happen. We literally couldn't do this show without your Patreon support. If you can afford $5 a month, then you get really great bonus content, extended interviews. For instance, we had that great Wallace Shawn interview that's up for people who are Patreon supporters. Very controversial. A lot of people are mad at Wallace Shawn for that. You'll also get early access to a great live show that I did in Ireland. And if you're not already a Patreon supporter and you become a $5 a month member, you'll just have access to hundreds of extra podcasts and videos. So, of course, I highly recommend that. So we're going to start with our first segment. This is a really exciting and important story. So 3 suspended Columbia graduate students are suing the university over its targeting of pro-Palestine protesters. And on this show, we're joined by 2 of those students and 1 of their lawyers. So we're joined by Catherine Elias Corin Groom, who is a former master's student specializing in Palestine studies prior to her expulsion for organizing against the Columbia-funded Israeli genocide in Gaza. She lived in Palestine with her partner while working for a local mutual aid network. Welcome, Catherine. Hi.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us. And we are also being joined by Brandon Murphy, who also was suspended. He's a master's student in social work at Columbia. He is passionate about connecting the struggles of the Palestinian people to those of all oppressed peoples in New York, especially Latinos and Mexican immigrants, given they are close to home for him as a Mexican. Welcome, Brandon.
How's it going?
Thanks for joining. And thirdly, we have joining us a lawyer, not just a lawyer, but one of the lawyers representing the 3 students, James Carlson, who is an attorney in private practice focusing on immigration and civil rights litigation. Welcome, James.
Katie, thank you so much for having me. Nice to be here.
Of course. So this is a kind of long saga, which I think requires that we go back in time a little bit. So before we even get to the lawsuit, let's just set the stage about what happened. And I think we have to start off with something that happened in January of 2024. That was a protest. There was a protest and something kind of problematic happened. And we actually had on 2 guests to talk about that, Layla and Aiden, who were both present when there was basically a chemical spray attack. So Catherine, you were there at the time, right? Can you talk about what happened?
Yeah, absolutely. It was actually my first protest that I was participating in on campus after joining the Columbia University Apartheid Divest coalition. It was a protest against the ongoing bombing of Gaza, our calls for Columbia to divest from the companies that were funding not only the genocide, but making the bombs that were dropping on Gaza. And we protested in the middle of January, shortly after the spring semester started. And partway through that protest, we were attacked by 2 Israeli soldiers who were students at the School of General Studies at Columbia. Those students attacked us with a chemical agent known as skunk spray. And myself and about 10 other students were hospitalized as a result of the skunk spray. And I and other students face ongoing medical symptoms, mine lasting for over 5 months following the attack. Yet Columbia did nothing to support us, and on the contrary, actually rewarded the student who attacked us.
Yeah, and let's actually show those photos because we have some photos of you in the hospital after the chemical spray attack. So here you are with a nebulizer, right? So can you explain why you had that?
Yeah, so I was admitted to the hospital twice following the skunk attack, and the first time was due to difficulties breathing. And they said in my diagnosis that I had experienced chemical exposure and that it had done temporary damage to my lungs. So I was given nebulizer treatments to help return my breathing to normal.
And we have another photo actually showing what the hospital said happened to you. So here we go. Here we see that it says you had the diagnosis was chemical exposure. Now, what is the claim of Columbia? How did they react to this chemical spray event? Yeah, how did they respond to this?
Initially, they pretended it didn't happen. It wasn't until people like Leila Saliba, who was on the show, and others began to speak out publicly and call out the university for not only ignoring the fact that many of their students had been endangered and attacked on their own campus, but that they were actively seeking to suppress the story and not provide us with any means of support in terms of healthcare or otherwise. And so once Leila and other students started speaking out about this, Columbia responded by quietly suspending the two students. And then within a few months, they decided to not only reinstate those students, but to actually compensate one of them with a $400,000 payment after he admitted to attacking all of us on campus.
So he admitted to spraying students with some substance. His claim was that it was not a chemical spray, but it was some like novelty gag thing that you could buy on Amazon. And yet somehow whatever that spray was wound up sending people to the hospital where they were diagnosed with chemical exposure.
Exactly. And no evidence has ever been provided to support that claim. And also, as someone who has spent many years in Palestine and has experienced skunk spray in Palestine, as it's regularly used by the Israeli occupation forces to suppress Palestinians in the streets, as well as to target homes through mass acts of repression. That substance, the smell of it, the effects of it are novel. It was created for exactly that purpose by the Israeli military, to be impossible to remove the odor, and it does have lasting health effects. And so to claim that it was some gag spray that you can buy on Amazon is quite absurd and can easily be disproven by the dozens of hospital records that myself and other students have stating that it was severe chemical exposure.
Wow. Okay, so next we're going to go to another event. You were one of the organizers of an event at Columbia, and can you talk about what the response to that event was?
Yeah, so every year, campuses all across the globe, not just here in the US, engage in something called Israeli Apartheid Week or Palestine Solidarity Month. At Columbia, we were engaged in a Palestine Solidarity Month. For the month of March, we hosted, I believe, over 50 different political education events, varying in their topics. We did tatriz events where people learned how to do traditional stitches. And one of those events that we hosted that I was a part of was called Palestinian Resistance 101. It was a political education event talking about and contextualizing the many forms of Palestinian resistance, including armed resistance, and contextualizing that within international law and the rights of oppressed and occupied peoples to resist by any means necessary. And we submitted all of the proper event requests and approvals through Columbia University system. They never actually canceled the event or denied the event. They just asked us to move it off campus or to move it onto Zoom, which we did. We hosted it at an off-campus residence and had a Zoom option. And after the event, the university decided to not even engage those of us who were present at the event in a discussion, in any sort of dialogue, and instead sent private investigators to our residences unannounced who had ties and were former federal law enforcement officers, and then suspended us on the basis of actually using suspension as a coercive threat. They told us if we did not attend interrogations with these private investigators within 24 hours, we would not only be suspended, but myself and Aiden and 3 other students were evicted from our housing, lost access to our classes, lost access to our, for me, for my campus job. There were all sorts of violations of our most basic human rights, and those basic human rights were essentially leveraged in order to try to force us into a interrogation with federal law enforcement officers.
Wow. Now, next up, of course, is the kind of famous encampment. But before we get to that, you actually have an image that you shared with me of a private investigator showing up. This is kind of ominous. Was this at your door, or was this at the door of someone else, one of the other harassed students?
Yeah, this was at the door of another harassed student who had a Ring camera and actually documented the private investigator. So Columbia still has once again tried to erase so much of the harm they have done to us. And I think what they forget is that as students in the 21st century, we document everything. So we have receipts to prove every single claim that we have made in this lawsuit.
Wow. Okay, so Brandon and James, when did you guys get involved in this story?
I can take that. So I had been involved with Quad, Columbia University Apartheid Divest for a bit in like preceding months, and not in the specific things that you were just talking to Catherine about, but in just capacity as an organizer, helping to build momentum as things were going from October 7th and the many months that followed, sort of building up to, the events that we saw happen in the past spring.
Okay. And what about you, James?
I actually was there for a lot of the encampment myself. My wife is a recent Columbia graduate. I have a number of friends on campus, including Catherine, who invited me up to observe. I was there, I think, at first in my capacity as a lawyer, observing, doing some Know Your Rights trainings, but was really inspired by what was happening at the encampment. It reminded me of Occupy Wall Street about 10 years ago, this sort of dynamic moment of people exchanging ideas and really, practicing democracy. So, I was there for a moment. I was actually arrested with a couple of people as part of the occupation of what we dubbed Hind's Hall. And yeah, just had a sort of front row seat of just the really intense repression, the sort of unprecedented attack from a private actor, from a university on its own students. And so, yeah, I think we're really excited to be pursuing this case and vindicating our claims. And I think, we're trying to set a lesson to universities around the country and the globe that you cannot single out a viewpoint for repression like this.
Right.
It's supposed to be an institution for free inquiry and debate, and they're doing the opposite right now.
So on that note, speaking of repression, let's go move forward. And then again, we're going to talk about the lawsuit, but let's take a look at the encampments that happened. Tell us about Hind Hall. And we have some photos of you, Catherine, lifting supplies up into Hind Hall and announcing that it's now being called Hind Hall. We can show those as you talk to us about what you guys did there.
Yeah, I think Hind's Hall and everything that came before it, honestly, were the reality of what repression on these campuses will continue to lead to, which is increased solidarity and increased resistance from the students themselves against our universities being deeply complicit in the murder of our loved ones in Palestine. And for many of us, that is deeply personal. It is people in our lives that are being affected every day by the ongoing genocide in Palestine. And for many of other students, it was a morally righteous cause that there was no question about which side we had to stand on. It was either standing against genocide or being complicit in our silence and our university's continued funding of that. And so for months prior to the encampments, we tried every tactic imaginable to hold the university accountable to the democratic will of the student body. There have been 3 referendums passed over the past 5 years at Columbia University and its affiliate institutions demanding that the university divest. Including in the spring, we held votes at over 8 colleges across Columbia University. All of those overwhelmingly passed, demanding that the university divest. We had done political education events. We had done cultural events. We had done sanctioned protests going through the university's own extremely insidious event and protest approval processes. And all this led to was increased repression. It led to the ban of SJP and JVP. It led to a violent
Students for
attack.
Justice in Palestine and Jewish Voice for Peace. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And it led to a violent attack on campus. And it led to a narrowing space for us to be able to actually enact our solidarity in any meaningful way. And that's what led to the encampments. Manu Shafiq who was the president of Columbia University, until her resignation. She was going to testify before Congress to feed into these extremely harmful and outright malicious narratives that were being spun against the Palestinian Solidarity Movement and the Palestinian Liberation Movement here in the US. And we launched the encampment to say that we would not be distracted with these charades that were happening in Congress. We know what is just, we know what is right, and that is demanding an end to our university's funding of genocide. And that's exactly what the encampment existed to do. But after only, I believe, 30 hours of the first encampment, Manu Shafiq invited the New York Police Department, their most vicious and historically brutal unit, the Strategic Response Group, onto campus to arrest myself and over 100 other student protesters. And as thousands of students witnessed that arrest, it sparked something new. So every time Columbia has repressed us, it has led to the next level of resistance. And what happened after that was the second encampment launch, something even larger, more beautiful, with massive waves of community support. And we saw that spark spread across the nation and across the globe. And that is also what happened with Hind's Hall. Columbia pretended to engage us in good faith negotiations. And what everyone saw after a few weeks in the second encampment was that Columbia was never engaging in good faith. They refused to allow the negotiations to be public. And then they ultimately declared that they would never divest from Israel, completely shutting down any ability for negotiation. And so we took Hind's Hall because we had to, because in the face of a genocide, in the face of the murder of a 5-year-old Palestinian child as she hid in a car, calling for an ambulance, calling for support. She was murdered with 355 bullets, funded by our university, funded by our government. And to do anything less than continue to protest would have been a stain on our legacy as students in the movement for Palestinian liberation.
And can you explain? And there's a really beautiful image of the projection of the words Hind's Hall on the on what is now Hind's Hall. Can you explain Columbia's role in the occupation and in the genocide? And that goes to all three of you, whoever wants to respond.
Yeah, I can start and then maybe kick it to you, B. So part of the reason that our demands and demands that became quite widespread throughout the student movement in the spring were both disclose and divest is because many of these universities are hiding behind the opacity of their investments. So as far as we know, Columbia is invested in at least 6 companies that are directly tied and fueling the Israeli occupation, colonization, and ongoing genocide in Gaza. Those include companies like Boeing, which was making the bombs dropping on Gaza for the last 18 months, and companies like Google that fund a lot of the apartheid technology that is being used to monitor and target Palestinians in their homes across historic Palestine. And so these are just a few of the companies that we know Columbia is invested in through its endowments, but we can't know the rest. I believe we only have access to either 3 or 4% of that investment portfolio because Columbia has refused to make that public, to make it transparent, which shows just how much they have to hide. And so we are demanding disclosure of all their investments and then complete divestment from any company complicit in Israeli colonization and occupation of Palestinian territory. And it's also really important to name that there is a deep conflict of interest at play here. We have Board of Trustee members like Jay Johnson who have direct ties to companies like BlackRock. We have Board of Trustee members that are sitting on the boards of the New York City Police Foundation, of BlackRock, who have investments in Boeing. And so this is not just about Columbia as an institution making a profit off of the genocide of our loved ones in Palestine, but also these key decision makers who hold an exorbitant and undemocratic amount of power over the university's investments, also making personal profits off of the murder of our loved ones.
Yeah, and to hop in on that, also seeing that Columbia admin was in cahoots with these billionaires who were putting pressure to go as harsh as they could on the students in Hind's Hall with the police. Yeah, it's like a cartoonishly villainous kind of, thread. And also just the fact that the police were there. I mean, I think that there's the sort of financial kind of connections, and then there's like the broader structural thing, which, in 68, several buildings were taken over. at Columbia to protest the war in Vietnam and also to protest gentrified kind of segregation practices in Harlem. And it resulted in a giant police riot, and Columbia swore they would never bring police back. And lo and behold, look what they do, you know?
Right.
And so I think that when we look at the structural things that happen, I mean, in Gaza, there are no more universities left, you know? And I think that these sort of actions are a very small taste of the same system with the same funding, the same training, the same sort of philosophy of how to suppress resistance. And I think that the key point is that they're afraid of that resistance, you know, that some students doing these things, you know, with a few materials taking over a building, like it required actual billionaires, you know, to step in and have to pull all these strings to try and shut it down. So I think that shows just something about the, you know, the nature of how power works in both situations.
Yeah. And what about you, James?
I think that's very well said. You know, I mean, I think there's infinitely more to be said about this. There's all sorts of academic connections between Columbia and other universities, and you know, projects in Tel Aviv. There's a partnership with a school there. There's all sorts of ways in which this university is sort of manufacturing consent for this genocide. And so I think that's precisely why this became such a lightning rod in the first place. Is people are very terrified at the idea of you know, taking back education in service of the people and actually putting it towards having these sorts of debates, having these conversations. I think it sort of exposed the lie of modern higher education, where, you know, these that priority was completely subsumed to the priorities of capital, of the billionaires. And when two were at odds, the school every time went with the wishes of the billionaires. So when they called the police on these different occasions to raid and assault and arrest 100 plus students in each occasion, that's not just, you know, odious and immoral to do to your students, it's actually illegal. And that's part of this lawsuit, right? Is they had procedures that the administration was supposed to observe before they could authorize having the police on campus. That required getting approval from the Senate Executive Committee. I don't want to get too in the weeds. The Senate Executive Committee explicitly denied that. They said, no, do not do that. They did it anyways, right? And there's patterns of that over and over. You mentioned earlier that they, at the very beginning of all this, broke up the student or pro-Palestinian organizations, SJP and JVP. That was apparently done at the behest of you know, very wealthy donors who threatened to pull funds if they did not break up these organizations. The next week, the school did that. So time and time again, what I saw putting together, what we saw, you know, putting this lawsuit together, was a school, you know, taking orders from people that had no business giving orders, precisely because they are wealthy, you know, individuals, and not following the sort of, you know, quote unquote democratic processes that were established after '68, precisely for this reason.
And
So,
if I could
yeah.
just add
Yeah,
one
of
more
course.
little piece there. This is not just unique to Columbia. I mean, that same night, folks who were arrested from all the CUNY colleges, NYU, like all the schools in New York. And I really want to shout them out because they got treated way more harshly than we did. The
And
folks
less
at City College.
coverage.
Yeah, absolutely. They're facing felonies right now, you know. They're going the distance. And so really want to stand for them. Because precisely because we're Columbia students, we get that extra cushion of just whatever privilege. And so this is a coordinated thing at the whole city level. You know, they had the amount of cops they had on every campus in the city. There's hundreds of people who were arrested that night. And so again, this shows that the machinations are bigger than just you know, like one little scene of you know, like one pocket of a university. It's almost reminiscent of like things happening in 2020 in New York with the protesting.
Yeah. And I just want to also bring up the fact that, you know, Rashid Khalidi, who's a professor at Columbia, the Edward Said professor, he's been on the show a bunch, and he was at the encampments, and he gave this really moving speech where he said, you know, if you go to Columbia's website, you see them like bragging about the student takeovers, and they acknowledge that these students were on the right side of history. And you guys, he said this to the students, like, you'll be on the website in the future. But right now, because it's real time, it's always easy to acknowledge people's bravery in retrospect. But when they're actually challenging power and capital, as you guys have pointed out, it's not convenient. It's much more convenient to do it kind of retroactively. So I want to actually show some of this police violence, this draconian police response. So what we're going to do is actually, Catherine, I want you to set up, we're going to show a clip of something that happened to you. We're going to watch it without sound, and I want you to set up what we're about to see. And then we're going to watch it with sound, and you guys will see why.
Yeah, absolutely. So the night of April 30th, those of us inside of Hind's Hall heard that police were mobilizing outside of campus. Columbia had already locked down campus to a level we had never seen before, even throughout the encampments, even during the first hours of Hind's Hall, to the point where not a single student, staff, or faculty member was able to enter. They also shut all press out. They pushed press into buildings. The remaining students who were living in the dorms were locked inside of dorm buildings because their goal was to make sure that no one would witness the violence and brutality that they were about to enact on us inside Hind's Hall. And so we are all in the bracing for the attack as we hear, I believe it was 8 flash grenades shot over our heads into the building. They're using saws to cut through the barricades. And then the video that you'll see is the moment that they break through and begin to assault students in some of the most horrific violence that's been enacted on students on our campuses since 1968.
And what happened to you? Because you're in this, right?
Yeah, I am closest to one of the doors that they break through first, and I'm thrown onto the stairs, and another student protester actually covers me with their body as they're beating them on top of me and carries me up the stairs away from the police assault.
And when you say you're thrown onto the stairs, it was a police officer who threw you onto the stairs, right?
Yeah, hit me in the face with their shield and threw me into the stairs.
Okay, so let's take a look at this. And that's you, right? You just fell down. Okay, and that's the student we're going to see now covering you, like to protect you. Okay, so let's watch now. And you have your hand around him, right? Like afterwards? Okay, because obviously, because he's helping you, not harming you. So let's watch now how CNN described that scene.
Barricades to reach the protesters who had been holding the building. As one protester appears to advance towards police, a second protester wrestles him to the ground. Police reach a stairwell.
Okay, so the way that they're describing that is you are approaching the police, and then another protester wrestles you to the ground.
Yes, and in typical CNN fashion, nothing close to the truth about it. I'm thrown by the police officer's shield hitting me across the face into the stairs, and another student at risk of their own life because they have to turn their back on the police and are then beaten with batons, covers me with their body and essentially lifts me up the stairs and places me in another student's lap because I'm disoriented. And then when I come to, the student whose lap I'm placed on gets stomped in the face by a white shirt commander, which led to an eye socket fracture and lasting concussions. Other students had burns from the flash grenades, and I was hospitalized out of the attack, as well as numerous other protesters inside Hind's Hall. And as Brandon mentioned earlier, this was not an event in isolation. The NYPD, under the direction of Eric Adams, under the direction of people like Rebecca Weiner, who is the head of the counterterrorism department of the NYPD, also a professor at Columbia, a professor in my college, the School of International and Public Affairs, who planned the execution of these attacks. They simultaneously attacked us the same night that they attacked the City College CUNY building occupation, the same night that they attacked 3 other encampments in the city. And dozens of not just students, but community members were hospitalized as a result of the police violence. And for what? Because we were protesting a genocide that everyone from the NYPD to these universities, to the Board of Trustees, to Eric Adams is deeply complicit in. So they were just protecting their bottom line at the expense of our lives and the lives of our loved ones in Palestine.
And we're going to show more media coverage of this because I think it's really worth looking at. But let's just take a look at your injuries, which you documented. So we actually have you being dragged away by the police. We have a video of that. So there you are describing what happened to you, right?
Yeah, because even at the time, we knew that there would be lies coming out from the university, from the NYPD, from the mayor's office. As soon as we were put in jail, we knew, for those of us that were around during the George Floyd uprisings of 2020 in New York City, we know how they always try to spin us as the assailants, as the bad actors, which is exactly what they did following the attack. But for those of us who were there and for those of us who documented what happened, we are able to prove exactly who enacted violence on whom in Hind's Hall.
Right. We did a whole video actually here at the Katie Halper Show. It was a mashup of the media describing the violence committed by pro-Palestine people. And we just showed them saying that, and then showed the actual violence committed, of course, by the Israel defenders and the racist rhetoric and offensive rhetoric. And of course, it actually comes from the Israel defenders, who have like a weird fetish with wishing rape on people. I mean, it happens. You could do a whole mashup of that, a montage of that. And, you know, using the N-word and spitting at people and attacking them. And at the best, you would think from the media coverage, at like the fairest media coverage outside of, you know, independent media, makes it seem like both sides were doing it. But most of the media makes it seem like it was really just one side. And of course, it was just one side, but it was the opposite side of what they were saying. And let's take a look at your, there's an image that we have of you with your well, there's that one. So what is that from?
Yeah, that is from the bruising when they dragged me away. They kept telling me that I wasn't allowed to speak. And so every time I was yelling as they walked me down the street, they would grab my arm and drag me further away from the students that were trying to document.
Not legal, right, counselor? To tell someone they're not allowed to speak?
It's true.
Okay. I should have gone to law school. And let's take a look at the other injury that you documented, which is a bloody leg.
I apologize, Katie. I need 1 minute for that.
Okay, sure. That's okay. And while Brad is doing that, where were you guys when this was happening? Did you witness any of this, experience any of this?
Yeah, I don't want to per se get into specifics, but like one other thing that I did want to point out about how it was covered is that there was like police body cam footage that was released later. I don't know if it was leaked or how it got out or what. And this like sanitized, like ridiculous story you get from CNN and all these other places, like you can see what happened. Like they used a buzzsaw to hack through the barricades and everything, shot a live bullet, a bunch of flash grenades, and just absolutely brutalized a bunch of defenseless, like young people. And the stories that were coming out, Eric Adams saying like, oh, like no violence was used. Like it's almost like laughable what the reality of the situation was. And also like in jail, seeing again from the other people around the city, like there was somebody in there who was an unhoused person who was living in a shelter, who had nothing to do with anything, who was just walking around and got arrested and like groped and basically sexually assaulted by the police. Like it was horrible, like this is stuff that people don't know about,
So this person was just rounded up?
Yeah, in jail. And
did they think that they had something to do with the protests? Not that it's okay either
who
way.
knows? I mean, they're just terrorizing this, like the neighborhood. Like they don't care. They don't give a difference. They're just anybody who gets in the way. That's why they put journalists in a separate room.
Right.
Because Brandon's referencing that they had essentially locked down the whole neighborhood for this raid, even outside of the campus. Yeah. Right. Yeah, and I think just really bears stressing, as if it's not obvious, between the gunfire, the flashbangs, the jaws of life, and the heavy duty saws, and just the ruthless beating of these protesters who were surrendering at that point. It's really just people were really badly hurt. It's a miracle that no one was killed. And that is, something that Columbia is absolutely culpable for. When you send in this, riot police that looks more like, Navy SEAL battalion or something like that. You're really rolling the dice on someone getting killed. And that
Right.
was a chance that Columbia knowingly took, calling the police on these people.
Mm-hmm.
So we actually have now the image of your leg. So that's what is that from?
Yeah, that was from when I was thrown into the stairs. And actually, when we were on the NYPD bus, we were first loaded onto a bus and my leg was bleeding and everyone was demanding that they give me medical attention and they refused. So everyone stood up and started chanting. They refused again. And I had to request 5 times before I ended up lifting my leg in the air and waving my bloody leg in front of one of the officers' body cams that was live and saying, "This is documented. Are you still denying me medical attention?" And that's when they finally unloaded me off the bus and then made me walk 6 blocks to get to the ambulance. But I used those 6 blocks to yell at all the students that were documenting from their windows. Because even in the 6-block radius surrounding Hind's Hall, as Brandon was mentioning, and James as well, they had forced every resident, student and non-student alike, inside their buildings. Again, an effort to suppress any sort of coverage or any sort of solidarity with those of us who were being arrested, and that still failed. And I think that to me is one of the most important lessons that people can take out of this. It's not that we got brutalized by the police. We are not the first. Sadly, we will not be the last, but it is about how the community comes together and what we continue to do to resist after such brutality. And I think that's a really important part of this lawsuit to me, is that we will not just accept that Columbia, the NYPD, these billionaire donors are allowed to essentially spin a false narrative, target us, deprive us of our most basic rights to housing, healthcare, and education, and get away with it. That we will speak out publicly, even when doing so comes at a great cost to ourselves and our own personal lives and loved ones. And we won't only speak out, we will continue to organize. That nothing about repression will lead to anything other than greater resistance.
Well, speaking of repression, let's take a look at how this was represented by ABC.
The unrest on college campuses here in New York and around the country. New video tonight from inside Columbia.
And by the way, if you want me to pause because you want to say something, just like lift your hand or something and I will. Okay.
Columbia University's Hamilton Hall as cops reclaim the building from occupying protesters. And not wasting any time today, cops in riot gear moved in to clear an encampment at Fordham's Lincoln Center campus. Eyewitness News reporter Jim Dolan and Sonia Rincon covering all angles tonight. We begin with Jim Dolan and that new video from Columbia. Jim?
Well, police trying to retake control of Hamilton Hall on the campus of Columbia University last night. There were traps at every turn.
Let's deploy a flashback.
And they deployed plenty of them. They used.
Can I just ask, when those got thrown in there, where were the people that were inside the building? Because from what I could hear on the coverage, they couldn't see past the barricade and they just blindly threw those in there.
They actually say in one of the pieces of body cam that they did release, and Brandon's point is well taken, that they release a very specific segment, which is before they start brutally attacking us even further. But they say that protesters are bracing against the barricades. They knew we were right inside and they shot at us anyway. And one of those flash grenades burned a student.
My God. Like,
as far as I know, flash grenades are not permissible protest suppression.
No.
Even under NYPD regulations, that was the first time, as far as I'm aware, that flash grenades have been utilized against protesters in New York City.
In preparing for this tonight's show, I was reading some white papers on these sorts of devices, and even in those papers, it makes very clear, like, it is super important that they are not detonated in close proximity to people, because they not only for the burning that you just mentioned, but they also detonate with something like 170 decibels, which is more than enough to completely blow out your eardrums.
Yeah, if I can step in on that point, like the purpose of them using these flash grenades is to completely disorient people.
Right.
and the sound it's like actually deafening, you know. Like it'll have like it can make somebody's like ears ringing for just like 10 minutes, you know, afterwards. And again, these are literal tactics of like actual warfare, you know. It's not a metaphor. So.
And it just stuck out to me because of the rhetoric that they'd be peddling about the police using restraint or calm or whatnot. That this just seemed incredibly to blindly throw those in there, not knowing what's on the other side. Just
yeah. And I think their narrative too, I mean, I noted the word in there of retaking and reclaiming the building. Retaking and reclaiming it from whom? For whom? Who does that building belong to if not the students and the community? Right. Well, also not just students, but like what do these universities exist for if not for the benefit of the broader community? Columbia claims all across their website that they exist to benefit not just Harlem, but the greater New York City community. Yeah, campus has been locked down for almost a year straight now. They treated our community members as if they were some hardened outside criminals instead of conscientious people who were standing up against a genocide. I mean, there was a nonviolent way for this all to end. Columbia could have stopped funding the murder of our loved ones. They chose not to. They chose to attack us and brutalize us instead.
Exactly. I said the same thing to Katie earlier today. I'm like, as I'm looking at this, I'm like, so the university and New York City they're like, okay, we could either listen to these peaceful protesters and stop actively facilitating genocide, or we can blindly throw these incendiary devices into a room full of unarmed people, and they chose the latter.
Yeah, so it's a metaphor for American politics, and also like to the point about how this affects the community. Again, to bring it to '68, the reason that there was so much tension, you know, like right after MLK was assassinated, Harlem is a tinderbox, you know, all these various different militant civil rights groups, you know, ready to throw down. Because the police, they're not just in Columbia, they're in all the surrounding streets, you know, in the surrounding community in Harlem. So everybody feels the effect of this in the same way that, you know, the Black community in Harlem has always had to feel the effect of police violence, whether it has to do with them or not. It's the same thing, you know. And so this whole heightened military state that Columbia has been, like Catherine's saying, for the past year, that affects the community, you know. And again, this is what's not being talked about in the media.
And I'm sorry to jump in. I just wanted to ask about that when we heard them say, let's use a flashbang. Katie, do you want to continue?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay.
Sauce to cut through chains protesters had used to keep them out. Battering.
And of course, they don't say students or community members. They say protesters, you know. And of course, a lot of the discourse was about outside agitators. Which
protesters had used to keep them out. Battering rams to break into rooms that were locked. One room at a time. Police took control, and in all that madness, safely arrested the pro-Palestine demonstrators who had seized the building the day before.
Also, note how they cut out the image of you getting thrown, right? So, Catherine, when I was asking about these clips, you pointed out that clip shows like the guy afterwards covering you, but you don't see the person that's you getting thrown. So that was an interesting editorial choice.
And just
nor do you. Sorry, I was just going to say, nor do you see following that it wasn't just one person who they stomped in the face. They stomped numerous people in the face, leading to hospitalizations and concussions and the broken eye socket. They also knelt on our back. There will be body cam footage someday if the NYPD ever does their job and releases it, of them kneeling on our backs as I and other people are saying that we can't breathe and that we're in pain, and they continue to do so, even though that tactic was outlawed following the George Floyd uprisings. There is so much body cam footage that has not yet been released that will be absolutely damning for the NYPD, for Eric Adams, and for the Columbia administration.
I just, wanted to also kind of throw out there, in case it wasn't apparent, because I feel like it's maybe more of a subliminal thing, but you notice the tone of voice this narrator is
hilarious.
Using?
It's really funny.
Like the inflections that he's using are, it adds. There's a message, an implication there. I feel like that it bolsters the, these dangerous thugs are just, blah blah blah. Like he's not just objectively it's not like the same as Amy Goodman narrating what's going on or something like that.
It has like
Yeah.
old school Copaganda,
Yeah.
like Dragnet
Yeah,
vibes.
right.
Yeah, he's really enjoying the cops first robbers of it all, but
Yeah.
there's no Orwellian aspect to it, right? Because he's talking about these dangerous criminals and everyone's sitting on the floor holding hands, protecting each other. And then he's talking about they retook control, and you see, they're not making it clear, but all those images of those smashing windows and stuff, that's the cops doing that. That's the cops cutting open doors and so forth. And there's, at some point they had tried to blame the occupiers for destroying a whole other wing of this building that they didn't have access to. And this is something I'm really hoping to get out of this litigation is, the body cam footage of them going through that. No one was ever in that from the protester side. That was the police trying to find a way into the building and then just breaking things on the way through because it seemed fun and maybe they could blame the protesters for it later. So yeah, this idea of like what is control, what is order, and what is chaos and disorder is just completely inverted here.
Also, when they say safely, like it's not safe if you stomp on people, you like break someone's eye socket, you throw people on stairs. Like, yeah, no one died, but I don't think anyone would describe this as a safe like de-escalation. Let's go back though. We're going to hear from some more really insightful people.
Tried to lock us out, but the
seized the building the day before.
They tried to lock us out, but the NYPD and the people of the city of New York will never be locked out, and we will always work together to keep our city safe.
He makes me ashamed to have a slight New York accent. That's really bad PR for us. Okay.
About 300 people were arrested at Columbia and CUNY combined, and the mayor says not all of them are students.
There are people that we have been watching in organizations that are not part of the campus. We've been very clear. There are individuals and organizations that are not students. We're seeing a shift in tactics.
No one was injured in the NYPD's action.
The efforts by the NYPD were thorough, professional, and they exercised a degree of calm in a very tense situation that should be commended.
Still, some criticized it anyway.
They escalated at every single point of the way, intending for this to be the result.
They are attempting to disrupt our city, and we are not going to permit it to happen.
Wow, way to like not even have a couple lines memorized. He's like looking down at his teleprompter.
This is the New York City Police Department.
Today, a much smaller encampment at Fordham's Upper West Side campus was cleared as well by the NYPD, and a handful of protesters there were arrested without incident.
The students arrested at the various campuses across New York City will be arraigned here at 100 Center Street. That's the same building former President Donald Trump is on trial right now.
Oh, you guys are just like Trump. Okay.
The charges for the students range from trespassing to criminal mischief. In Lower Manhattan, Jim Dolan, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
I also wonder, is that the same place that Mayor Eric Adams would have been arraigned at if he hadn't have just said to the Trump administration, yeah, I'm not going to do anything to stop whatever you want to do around here. And right after that, the DOJ dropped the charges against Eric Adams. It's just
good question. Yeah.
Hard for me to listen to people like that talking about law and order and whatnot with a straight face.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, anything you can share about this lawsuit, the status of it, anything you want to make sure that people know about, like the basic contours of the lawsuit, or anything you want to say in response to that footage? Yeah.
I mean, at this point, we're waiting and eager to see Columbia's reply. They've been served, and so the ball's in their court. And speaking as an attorney on this case, I think we're just very eager to pursue justice here, and hopefully set a precedent that other universities will have to abide by going forward.
Yeah. And could you just really quickly list off a couple of the things that they did that you're suing them over? Like, I know there's the wonky stuff, but there's stuff relating to like tenant law.
So, we have, I think, 10 causes of action in our complaint. There's violations of landlord-tenant law for evicting plaintiffs with no notice under New York law and Columbia's own guidelines. You're supposed to give 30 days. there's, you know, a lot of this actually comes because it's a private university. What would normally be like a First Amendment violation or other sort of constitutional claims, if it was a public university, are effectively contract claims under this, that the students had a right to a certain series of procedures and due process based on the charters of the school, the founding documents, and all the procedures that were put in place in '68 and before then. And so, you know, really a lot of what this complaint is about is that the school tossed aside all these sort of procedures. There was a whole hearing body that's in place to oversee student protest activity. And that hearing body is supposed to be comprised of faculty members, students, people explicitly in a non-disciplinary position. They're not allowed to issue interim sanctions, which is essentially what was used to put plaintiffs on indefinite suspension. So by saying you're being put on interim suspension and then leaving them there until this date, you know, almost a year later, in addition to their final suspension orders and all these other punishments. They're not allowed the same due process procedures under this new procedure that the school basically invented whole cloth to put them through. They're not allowed, you know, to bring an attorney to their hearing. They're not allowed to see the evidence against them ahead of time. A really interesting part of this is that under these new procedures the school made, they're required to comply with the investigation, and that's not really defined. And so in this case, some of the plaintiffs were punished for not complying enough, even though they didn't do anything wrong and the school wasn't really alleging in these instances they had done anything wrong. They're saying, hey, you didn't name names and, you know, snitch on other people that you had no business talking about. So you didn't comply with their investigation, and they were issued new sanctions for that. So really, like, that's part of what scares me about this, is that, you know, the school was engaging in some pretty Trumpian tactics. So sort of just like tossing aside any sort of scintilla of due process of honoring their procedures, right? It was just all about how do we go after our political enemies, while then propping up our sort of political allies, the people who assaulted the plaintiffs. Let's give them $500,000 or $400,000 and clear their disciplinary record and all these other things. But let's, you know, effectively, you know, try to ruin the lives and careers of anyone on the other side of this debate.
Well, that's actually, before we end this discussion, for which I'm extremely grateful. Thank you, all three of you. This has been really inspiring and enlightening. What, Brandon and Catherine, what has been the personal, political, professional fallout on you? Like, how have your suspensions changed your lives?
You want to go first?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, kind of completely turns your life around. You know, I was a server at a like fine dining type place, you know, since I started as a student in my master's program in social work. And so luckily that was able to hold me over, and I was eventually able to get full time for that. But I had to just like cobble together like a plan to just survive. I had to move, and just all these chaotic life things kind of coming down at the same time. Like I lost my healthcare. I had to stop seeing my therapist. I had to just like, yeah, kind of like recraft like so much of where my life was heading. I mean, I'm still in a position now of like figuring out even where I stand with social work. You know, something that like I think is one of the most just messed up things that came out of all of this is like I was a school counselor at a school in the Bronx as part of my social work internship, basically my practicum internship. And I was seeing clients like in the middle of the process of like terminating with clients. These are all low income, you know, like immigrant people of color, kids of color, you know, who a lot of them might not have like any really supportive people in their life who they can talk to in this way. And when I'm suspended, that's just out the window. Like I can't talk to them at all. To this day, I don't know how they're doing, you know? So like my kind of life as a social worker has just really been put on pause, and I have to figure out how to renavigate. It's just been this perpetual limbo state, and then them throwing bureaucratic hurdle after bureaucratic hurdle and drawing you through this thing that's just kind of meant to try and break your will, with no transparency, no due process, no clue about what's going to happen. And this is why I think this lawsuit is so important, because it's just taking a stand like, all right, you know, like, you want to play ball, we'll play ball. Like,
wow. That's really awful. But I'm not surprised that why would they be concerned at all with those people whose lives you touched, right? Like, They don't care. That's probably a bonus for them, honestly. Yeah. Sorry about that, though. I hope you are able to do social work. And what about you, Catherine?
Yeah, I think, similar to Brendan, but also for me, I was evicted from my housing. That was the first most immediate impact that I faced. They gave me 24-hour notice to leave my apartment, which I had moved to Columbia just over a year ago from Palestine on the promise of a full scholarship to Columbia to pursue Palestine studies. I did not have any sort of backup plan other than returning to Palestine, which in the midst of a genocide, after being doxxed and facing the online targeting and harassment and reports to the FBI and the Israeli government that I was experiencing, also endangers my ability to ever go back to Palestine and be with my partner there. And so that was one of the most painful, I would say, impacts of the suspension, was that Columbia loves to bring us in when our work can be relegated to solely the theoretical realm, when it can be treated as an academic exercise. But that is not what Palestine is for me, nor will it ever be. And so if I am reinstated, which is what this lawsuit is demanding, and which is what I hope for, it will have to be to pursue Palestine studies in its entirety. I'm not interested in my community or my loved ones being treated as some tokenized object that they can name an Edward Said program after. But then when we actually follow Said's legacy, we are criminalized, we are suspended, we are brutalized. So the eviction, the doxing, the loss of my ability to potentially ever return to Palestine, were all really painful. The loss of my scholarship, which was the only way I was ever able to attend a university like Columbia. My scholarship was worth over $120,000, and Columbia revoked that, effectively expelling me, ensuring that I can never return to campus unless my scholarship is also reinstated. And I think also really, really painful for me was the loss of access to our community. They labeled me an outside agitator myself. I was the only student from Columbia to not have my charges dismissed. Columbia and the New York City DA's office decided to dismiss the charges of every other Columbia student who was inside Hind's Hall. They said that I was not a student, and so I was alongside all of our other amazing outside agitators in the building. But while that part is funny to me because I take no, I wear outside agitator as a badge of honor in that sense. It was
You're an
deeply
honorary.
painful that I was, but that I was cut off from my entire community at Columbia. I'm not allowed on campus. I would receive trespass orders if I step on campus or even into the residence buildings of my friends. And so what they've tried to do is single out a few of us, make an example out of us, exactly like they did in 1968 to the 4 students that were expelled then, and hope that that example is going to scare other students into not rising up and not continuing to protest and resist. And that is a failing strategy, as it always has been. And Columbia students continue to resist to this day. Removing us from campus has not stopped the organizing nor the resistance that's happening. And I think this spring is going to see sparks start to fly again, not just at Columbia, but we're already seeing it at Bowdoin. Student occupations are happening. They continue to happen. Students are creative. They are getting more and more creative with their tactics and their ways of protest every single day. And what they have done is just inflict immense, inhumane harm on those of us they tried to make an example out of, but it did not work to squash resistance nor protest. And so Columbia has done this to truly no benefit to anyone except for their bottom line. And that's a legacy they're going to have to live with. But I hope it's one that they can be held accountable for sooner rather than later. I wouldn't like to read 60 years from now that Columbia apologizes to the students of 2024 who were unjustly targeted. They need to be held accountable for that now, while repair can still be done to the immense damages it has caused for not just the 3 of us, but the hundreds of students that are still going through the disciplinary system. There are hundreds of students waiting for disciplinary sanctions from the first Casa Solidarity encampment and Hind's Hall. And those decisions could be coming out in the next weeks or month. And Columbia has not done right by us, but absolutely can do right by those students by dismissing their charges immediately.
Wow. And to the extent that you can share any of this, and I don't know if you can, but if is your partner Palestinian, and to the extent you can share, what is your partner experiencing in Palestine now?
Yeah, my partner is in Palestine. I was able to return for a few months this summer, and since then have experienced even higher levels of doxing. So we're working to figure out whether or not I will ever be able to return, and what our path forward looks like. For him personally, I will say that he has grown up his entire life from the first Intifada to the second Intifada through today in one of the most severely restricted areas of historic Palestine. And to be honest, I think the thing that makes me still so proud to this day, and why I will never renounce nor apologize for a single act of protest I engaged in on that campus, is because when I went back to Palestine this summer, all of my friends and my community and my partner there told me how proud they were of us. And while I was in court for the Hind Hall charges, they were all with me, cheering us all on. And if we did anything to that building occupation that made our people in Palestine who are resisting genocide every single day proud of their siblings in the US, then I stand by that 1000% and would do it all again.
Great. Well, thank you. That's an amazing way to end the conversation. Very inspiring. And thank you to the three of you for all that you've done and all that you do, and let us know how we can support you, and we'll keep covering this story. So, yeah.
Thank you, Katie.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Of course. Good night, guys. Wow, that was really inspiring and moving. I got a little bit close to crying at the end, because that was a pretty beautiful story about, being told by the people resisting genocide that they're proud of you. That's a nice thing to, I imagine, to keep you going. And I do think that, as abysmal as the world is right now, and, as we go back and forth between a genocide and ethnic cleansing plans, one of the things that I do think is helpful to remember is how this does encourage people and give people hope who are living lives that are much more difficult than we are living. And so I think it's, in some ways, it's like the least that we can do, even if it doesn't end the occupation right away, or, get rid of apartheid, stop the genocide. The most encouraging thing that I've ever heard personally, and I don't have a partner in Palestine, so I'm not comparing my experience to Catherine's, but just hearing from people who are in Palestine or are from Palestine, and hearing their gratitude and appreciation is extremely encouraging. Again, I don't want to say that makes it seem like I'm being self-congratulating. I just mean literally just having people on the show talk about what they're doing and highlighting what's happening, I think is something that people appreciate. So we are going to start our next segment, and everyone give this a thumbs up if you haven't already, because that was an amazing segment. And this next one is going to be great too, but give it a thumbs up. It's a really good free way to support the show and support the people who we bring onto the show. So we are now moving to our second segment, which is an update about Luigi Mangione. And for that, we're going to be joined by Jamie Peck and Sam Beard. They are co-hosts of the Party Girls podcast. Jamie Peck, before that, co-hosted the Intifada podcast and worked for 4 years as a producer, contributor on The Majority Report with Sam Cedar. And she has done a lot of journalism focusing on grassroots activism, government policy, feminist perspectives, and electoral politics. And she's also done a lot of work around Cop City and stopping Cop City. And Sam Beard is a Chicago-based organizer, writer, and media specialist who's been active in revolutionary organizing and activist campaigns since 2012, and been involved with the Gaza Solidarity Encampment movement, and was a spokesperson for the Block Cop City Mass Action. So let us bring on to the show Jamie and Sam. Welcome.
Hi.
Hi. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having us.
You're muted, Sam.
Wow, amateur mistake. Good evening. It's nice to meet you, Katie.
You too. So you guys have an exciting announcement to make about Luigi Mangione and the December 4th Legal Defense Committee. But I want to know first, it's up to you. You can share the news, but I also want to know how and why you got involved in this cause in the first place. Up to you how you want to. I'm letting you choose the order in which you answer those questions.
Just briefly, before we rewind the clock a little bit, the news is that we've been fundraising for Luigi Mangione on his behalf for about 2 months now. And just in the last week or so, we got wind that he is accepting the funds and they will go towards to cover his legal defense. Not only that, but we'll continue to fundraise on his behalf indefinitely for the duration of the trial. So that means that so far we've raised over $320,000, which really, to be sure, was raised by the 10,000 plus donors, 11,000 plus donors who actually contributed to the fund.
Wow. Well, mazel tov, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This is a big day in history. You guys raised $300,000 for Luigi, and the Katie Halper Show reached 250,000 subs. So, milestones. Yeah.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Congrats all around.
Yeah. Congrats all around. So tell us, Jamie, what made you guys get involved in this cause in the first place?
That's a great question. So obviously, the people organizing this all believe in the right to a fair trial. Why did we pick Luigi Mangione in the first place? I think this case has really catalyzed a conversation among Americans and even around the world about our nation's murderous, cruel and unusual is really the best way to describe it, private for-profit health insurance system. And it seems the massive outpouring of support that people have shown for Luigi, if you read the comments on the fundraiser, some of them are really incredibly touching. People who work in the healthcare industry, medical providers saying that they're sick and tired of seeing people suffer and seeing people die because their insurance company decided to deny some life-saving care in order to enrich the profits of shareholders. We've got comments from people saying, my husband died because his cancer treatment was turned down. I'm donating this money for him, things of that nature. So anytime you see massive amounts of Americans talking about healthcare and talking about these class-based issues in such a inspiring way, it seems like something worth paying attention to.
And I want to know if you guys could share, having looked into this, what made you decide to focus on the fundraising side, like the legal defense of it? And also what you think the media is missing, not even in their like spin about it, but just in terms of the background, in terms of the story. Like, what do you think, what part of Luigi Mangione's story do you think has not been told?
So just a little historical fact about the fund is it was actually created in the days immediately after Brian Thompson's untimely passing in Manhattan, and it was made before while the manhunt for whoever the person associated with that was still ongoing, before anyone knew who Luigi was, before this young man was found at McDonald's and alleged to have been connected to the incident. The fundraiser was made preemptively, and that's because we sort of, our wager was that if they end up catching someone and saying that this person is responsible for Thompson's death, they're going to throw the book at them. And the reason for the latter is not only because of the specific act that occurred, but specifically because of the widespread, unprecedented, universal,
post-partisan.
Yes, post-partisan, cross-partisan, at the very least, shrugging off of the incident. And the spectrum goes, all over the place from there. But and
celebrating,
that,
obviously.
celebrating, sure. Poking fun at it, whatever it is, talking about karmic justice, things like that. Saw that online. And it was that which had the powers that be shaking in their boots. So it was that widespread resonance that we were feeling across America that led us to create the fund. And then a few days later, they catch this person and claim that he's connected to the incident. And then the fundraiser just kind of took off from there.
Right. And what do you think is being missed? Like what do we know about his story, about his healthcare woes, about what motivated his I mean, okay, wait. So he allegedly did this. This is a little awkward. So he allegedly did this, right? I don't know how we talk about this. Like, he wrote the letter, right? He wrote the letter he wrote. Is that being disputed?
Right now, Luigi's defense team hasn't presented or made a statement on any any of the and as far as I know, the police and the prosecutors haven't advanced evidence yet either. They just snatched this young man and said that he's the guy. Obviously, it's a difficult issue to talk about. It's extremely important to, Luigi's alleged to have done these things.
He's innocent until proven guilty.
Of course, yes. Right.
Yeah.
But like, what do we know about the healthcare trials and tribulations that he experienced?
Well, we know he had some chronic back pain from a back injury that he sustained in Hawaii. We know that he struggled to get the proper medical care. And despite coming from a relatively privileged background, which just goes to show you how bad things really are for healthcare in this country, that an Ivy League graduate can't get proper medical care. But I don't know that we can speculate. None of us know what's been going through his head until we hear directly from him. But it does seem like he had some negative experiences with the healthcare industry for sure.
And there was this, folks will recall after Mangione's identity was revealed and the online detectives found the Goodreads list and the Twitter that's allegedly his, and I think his gray old account and other things too. And they're starting to trying to piece together an image of this person. What sort of struck me is like, he seems to be a pretty normal guy, right? Like you said, went to an Ivy League school, is reading kind of all sorts of stuff, right? Whether it be self-help books or novels. Of course, Ted Kaczynski's thrown in there. The Lorax is thrown in there. Things that are about tech, things about healthcare, things about the environment, right? Like really trying to find, to me, what I saw is a young man trying to find truth in this world, right? And I was moved by that.
Mm. So I actually wanted to play part of an interview that you did, Jamie, with the great one of the great Cuomos of the world. There are about 3 of them that we know of: Chris, Andrew, and Mario. Mario being the best, and he's no longer with us. And he's very problematic, by the way, personally and politically. But that's for another show. Let's take a look at this interaction that you had with Chris Cuomo, so we can engage in some fun media analysis.
The man accused of assassinating United Healthcare CEO is a terrorist, says New York authorities. The official charge.
And by the way, if you want me to stop at any point, just raise your hand. Okay.
Sure.
First-degree murder in furtherance of terrorism. The New York Police Department commissioner said anyone who supports the accused or his crimes.
There's no heroism in what Mangione did. This was a senseless act of violence. It was a cold and calculated crime that stole a life and put New Yorkers at risk.
That suit is a crime.
We don't celebrate murders and we don't lionize the killing of anyone. And any attempt to rationalize this is vile, reckless, and offensive to our deeply held principles of justice.
Who's she talking about? People like this.
Honestly, this guy should run for president if he ever gets out of jail. He literally stood in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shot someone in broad daylight, and everybody loves him, not despite of, but because of that.
Yeah.
And I think that is a beautiful thing. Allegedly.
Right.
Beautiful thing. Everybody loves him. Jamie Peck does. That's who you were just listening to. She is also a spokesperson for a legal defense fund, which has raised, ready for this, more than $150,000.
This is obviously old news. This is from a couple months ago. Now you're at 300,000. I hope Chris has you back on.
Remember, this guy doesn't need the money.
I
The
do
irony
too.
is his family made a fortune off of healthcare, nursing homes. But there's no question that on social media, there is a groundswell of support, especially among younger people, for this guy, but more importantly, for what he did. Why? Let's get the answer from one of them. Jamie Peck joins us now. Thank you for taking the opportunity.
Thank you for having me.
Help me understand, why is it a beautiful thing? Why do you support him assassinating another human being in cold blood?
So I was definitely joking a little bit, obviously drawing a comparison between what Donald Trump Pause it said for a about sec. himself. Yeah, here's where I get to explain to Chris what a podcast is,
Right.
and that sometimes we joke around.
Yeah. And that's obviously a reference to the shooting someone on Fifth Avenue, right? The
Yeah.
famous Donald Trump line. Okay.
And the sort of explosion, this appetite, this excitement for the conversation that Luigi Mangione started. But I do think to call this an act of terrorism is an insult to the intelligence of the American people. Terrorism is something designed to strike fear into the hearts of non-combatant civilians, right? The general population. Nobody but a tiny class of CEOs has been made to live in fear by Luigi's actions, but nearly
Alleged
everybody
actions.
knows what it's like to live in.
So by the way, moving forward, just imagine alleged is implicit in everything that anyone says on the show. Okay. So we're like retroactively and like future casting it in there.
Fear of having a necessary medical claim.
Wait, let me rewind that because it's a really good point. Hold on. Oops, sorry. How did that go back so far?
I'll stop interrupting myself.
No, it's good. I just want to make
Why
sure.
is it a beautiful thing? Why do you support
that already?
I was definitely joking a little bit, obviously drawing a comparison between what Donald Trump said about himself and the sort of explosion, this appetite, this excitement for the conversation that Luigi Mangione started. But I do think to call this an act of terrorism is an insult to the intelligence of the American people. Terrorism is something designed to strike fear into the hearts of non-combatant civilians, right? The general population. Nobody but a tiny class of CEOs has been made to live in fear by Luigi's actions, but nearly everybody knows what it's like to live in fear of having a necessary medical claim denied, the fear of having your life ruined or potentially ended by a stack of medical bills. And I think in a system with so much violence that's directed from the top down, it should come as no surprise when violence begins to boomerang back from the bottom up onto the 1%. Also, I would like to remind you on the subject of terrorism, nearly 3,000 Americans lost their lives on 9/11, right? This is the largest terrorist attack this country has ever seen. An estimated 190,000 people are murdered each year by our broken healthcare system. That is the equivalent of 52 9/11s worth of deaths every year. Every single week, another 9/11 happens. So I got to ask, who is the more prolific terrorist in this equation?
Good question. That is a good question. And that was a great interaction. Anything you wish you had said to him that you didn't get to say? I mean, you did a great job. I'm just want to give you the
Thank you for
chance.
that. Well, first of all, I should say, to be fair, according to our research, the 1/9/11 every week estimate month, what did I say? 52. Yeah, every week, 1/9/11 a week. That is on the high end. The lower end estimate is only 9/11 about every 2 weeks.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
clearly much better.
Yeah.
What
Thanks
do
for
I
that
wish?
correction.
Yeah, no, I think it's important. What do I wish I had said to him? Well, I think so far I said what I needed to. There is a part. Are we going to keep going? Because there's a part where he tries to make me look like a hypocrite because I am against the U.S. backed genocide in
Oh,
Gaza.
yes. Yeah. Well, we'll
And-
cut that in
yeah,
later.
if you give
Or
me
if you wanna-
if you give me like a minute, I can.
Yeah.
pull
Yeah,
that
we
up
can
for
play
you.
that. Yeah. Well, all right. Well, yeah, that's actually, we'll find that, but it's interesting because he hasn't been that great on that issue at all. And, he's someone who the whole conversation of talking about violence reminds me a little bit of when people talk about Hamas and Israel and terrorism, and they say that Hamas is a terrorist organization. And then they don't acknowledge that Israel commits terrorism it's not comparable the way that they are engaging in terrorism. I mean, there's a big moral spectrum according to which people are prepared to condemn Hamas not at all, condemn Hamas totally, condemn certain actions of Hamas, whatever you want to say. Like there were Israel committed a vast amount of war crimes. Just on October 7th, Israel committed way more war crimes than has been acknowledged. We know that there's a Hannibal directive that was issued. We know Israel killed their own. We know they've been killing their own, and not to mention the Palestinians. But I'm just pointing out the hypocrisy. But whenever someone talks about Hamas's crimes, unless they're prepared to call out the infinitely greater terrorism committed by Israel, they just have absolutely no leg to stand on. So if Chris Cuomo wants to, condemn or call out murder, that's fine. But if he doesn't acknowledge the murderous nature of our healthcare system, then he likewise has no leg to stand on.
And it's hard because that's what all of the pundits are really trying to focus on, right? They want the spectacular sort of moral conundrum of, are you endorsing murder, right? When we call one person getting killed, we call that a murder. But what do we call it, right? When we have a system that very predictably is
right. And
intentionally,
intentionally
is set up
Yeah.
to cause the early deaths of tens of thousands, probably more people per year, we call it good business, right? And we act like that's just a fact of life.
Right.
It should be called bureaucratic murder, or something, right? And it's every single time that we talk to the media, it's the same thing. It's well, are you endorsing murder? Did Brian Thompson deserve to die? And it's at the end of the day, I don't pretend to know who can live and die. I'm not unlike Brian Thompson and the other people on his fucking executive team. So it's you can't separate these larger ethical questions from these individual moral snapshots.
Right. Yeah. Which is why, by the way, I just had on Wallace Shawn, and there's a clip that I released that's gone really viral where he says that Israel is committing crimes worse than the crimes committed by the Nazis. And in the larger discussion, he talks about how he is a pacifist. He embraces pacifism. He doesn't hate people anymore. He used to. But the reason that I found that conversation so amazing is because I'm so tired of people embracing pacifism, condemning Hamas, and not condemning Israel. If you're someone like Wallace Shawn who calls Israel out for their terrorism, I'm much more comfortable with your kind of analysis of pacifism. And he also was and who am I to tell Palestinians what to do? He was very aware of that. Another person who I think does an excellent job at this is Cornel West, because Cornel West says, yes, there were war crimes committed by Hamas on October 7th, obviously way more by Israel. But he says Hamas is actually an anti-terrorist organization because it was founded to take on Israel, which is the bigger terrorist. So those are the types of people who I am very happy to hear kind of waxing poetic or waxing philosophical about murder and violence. But when it's people who are okay with the murder built into the system, whether it's healthcare or the occupation, that's when they should just, take a walk, keep walking, whatever. Brad, let us know if and when you have that.
Yep, I got it ready, and I'll just leave it to you to cut it off whenever you want.
Okay, great. So here's that other moment that Jamie, you just kind of set up where Chris tries to call you out.
What I don't understand, and you are somebody who in your positions is constantly trying to embrace the humanity of situations, right? I've been looking at why you support what you do with what's happening in the Middle East conflict. To me, this seems to be anathema to this. Nothing within a system gets changed by violence. How can you expect?
really?
Yeah, we're having a conversation, but we're not having the right one, because the healthcare industry now has high ground because they've been victimized by this chooch. This isn't how we get insurance to be better, by putting a bullet in somebody's head. Why would you get behind that?
Okay, anything you want to say there, or do you want to just play your
Yeah.
response?
So at the time, I was absolutely everybody that I talked to for advice about this highly stressful, hostile interview that I had about 3 hours of notice to
So you
prepare
did
for.
very good.
My
Well on.
bad.
Why, thank you. Like everyone told me, you just need to harp on your points. Don't let him lead you down any dark alleyways or whatever. So that's just kind of what I did. And I just kept saying the same things over and over. But like, I actually do have an answer for that. Like, part of me wishes I debated him a little bit more,
Right.
because so many of the things he said just now were absolutely absurd on their
Yeah.
face.
Right.
From nothing has ever gotten changed by violence
Yeah.
in the history of this country. Like,
U.S.
what?
have the founding of this great country, this great nation. Cuba, on the other direction, like Chile with Pinochet. I mean, yeah, like violent reactionary coups that changed the country, to revolutions that changed the country, like Cuba. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this country was literally founded on violence and is continually maintained by violence, which is generally directed from the top down, right? It's very rare that you see violence coming from the bottom up, but I do think that's an inevitable fact, especially when something, one of the great injustices of our time, has been completely unaddressed by either of the major parties. It was not an issue in this last election. And in fact, hundreds of thousands of people lost healthcare under the Biden administration. But if you want to look at history, we had to fight a war to end chattel slavery, right? Which was the great injustice of that time. And if you want to contextualize it, things like slave uprisings where slaves killed their masters, or John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, these things were viewed as terrorism in their time. And John Brown especially was viewed as a completely crazy person. But in retrospect, I think unless you're an out and proud white supremacist, most people are happy that we don't have chattel slavery anymore. Of course, slavery is still permitted for people who are in prison. That's a larger conversation that we can have. But these folks were shown to be on the right side of history. And unfortunately, we needed an incredibly brutal and bloody war in order to end slavery. But, that needed to happen by any means necessary. So I think people really need to be taking the wide view on this, as well as evaluate things in their proper ethical context. But I did have a little bit of the spirit of the stairs regarding the offensive comparison he made to the US-backed genocide in Gaza. And I actually tweeted about it, saying how offensive it was for him to compare the untimely death of one CEO with a lot of blood on his hands to the wholesale slaughter of thousands of men, women, and children who are part of an oppressed nation. So Cuomo actually saw that I tweeted this, and he slid into my DMs, and he was really mad.
Yeah, he didn't like that.
Ooh, you want to read them?
There's a little tea for you there. You want me to just read them out
You
for
can even
you?
screen share them. Yeah.
Ah, shit.
Yeah, why not?
Wow. Here it comes. The tea is steeping.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can find it here.
Also, as you find that, I'll just say a couple things, which is like, there's moral arguments to be made, and then there are historical arguments. There's like statements of fact. So he's incorrect, right? Violence has made changes. You can argue that it's immoral and indefensible, but that's a separate argument. Obviously, violence makes changes. The other thing that he's wrong about is that the healthcare industry has now, has the high moral high ground. That's not true.
Yeah.
This has not created like a swell of sympathy for the healthcare industry. If anything, people have been
Absolutely
shocked
not.
by how either tolerant, understanding, or outright celebratory people have been towards
Yeah.
Luigi.
Yeah. Yeah. Fact check. It is not
Yeah.
possible for an individual to victimize the health insurance industry.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody thinks that it is.
I mean, if you found like a janitor who worked for the healthcare industry, right, and like you took them out, that would be maybe an unintentional way for them to weaponize it, but not when it's a CEO who's basically signing people's death warrants.
Yeah, I don't think that this industry is ever going to be able to claim the moral high
Right.
ground.
Yeah, right. That was a ridiculous point. Yeah.
I found the.
Oh, okay.
I found
Let's
him.
do it.
What do I hit? Present.
Yeah.
Oh wow. I don't think I have anything bad open. I'll just share my screen.
You can also send
You can,
screenshots.
yeah, Jamie, you can either send me
Oh.
screenshots or that's probably the quote unquote
Safest.
safest, but you can also, instead of your whole screen, you can select just that tab,
Oh,
if that makes sense.
Microsoft Edge tab. It's in it's not in Microsoft Edge, it's in Chrome.
So
that's the tab you would select.
Yeah, you would select that Chrome. You
It's
like go
not
to
coming up.
Just
Oh.
screenshot it and send it to Brad. That's probably the best way.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
How should I send it to you? I know this is riveting.
No,
You
no,
can text him or text me, and I'll text it to you.
text or email, whatever you prefer.
All right, I'll put
You
an
guys get
email.
to see how the sausage is made. Yeah.
I'm doing it as fast as I can. Wait, what's your email?
Sam, tell me.
I'm sending it to you right now.
Sam, how did you get politicized? By the way, were you raised by politically conscious people?
I mean, not any more than your average, suburbanites. No, when I went down to school in Southern Illinois, I learned about this thing called fracking, which I hadn't really heard of much before. And if you haven't done your research on fracking, check it out.
Right.
It's messed up stuff.
Yeah.
And that was the first sort of political campaign that I got involved in. I mean, I guess prior to that, when I was like in middle school and high school, I got into punk music and I had my anarchy symbol on my jacket, and it was sort of
just kidding.
And it was sort of like just angsty vibes or whatever. But there's a correlation there, right? It's like and then once I went down to school, just got involved in various activism worlds, kind of settled in anti-capitalist, anti-police, indigenous solidarity, anti-pipeline struggle stuff. And then, down in Carbondale, there was one really big moment for us down there. It's a small town, Carbondale, Illinois.
Oh, okay.
It's it's Southern Illinois University's down there. And during Donald Trump's first inauguration, back in 2017, J20, there was like this massive black bloc in DC, and there were 6 people from Carbondale arrested in that black bloc in this tiny little town from Southern Illinois. I wasn't one of them. I was leading a student walkout then, but really got slingshotted into the anti-repression world, trying to do support for these defendants. And that's that feels like forever ago. That was Trump won. The whole world's changed 300 times over. How about you? I'm sure your listeners are familiar, but I'm not.
Yeah. Raised by lefty parents. I'm kind of a stereotype from a Woody Allen film. I don't know if you saw Annie Hall, but when he's like, what socialist summer camp, Central Park West, strike-oriented family. So I'm from Riverside Drive, which is the other side of the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Yeah. Socialist summer camp did that too. Yeah.
Are you do you live in New York still?
I do. Yeah.
Wow.
I live in Manhattan. Yep.
I love
my
that.
mom's from the Bronx. My dad's from Queens. And I guess my grandparents were born in New York also. My grandmother was born in a really interesting place called the Coops, like the co-ops, but it's pronounced the Coops, which was basically 90% Jewish, 10% Black, and 80% communist. And it was designed based off of the Karl Marx apartments in Vienna. So it had some communal stuff happening, but yeah.
Cool. I'm from just about as far of the opposite of that as possible, from Naperville, which is like the suburbs of all suburbs. So I've been in Illinois my whole life. I'm in Chicago. I'm calling from Chicago. So any other Illinois people in the chat, sending love.
Yeah. How did you meet Jamie?
You read this little bio that I don't know where it came from at the beginning of the episode. A media specialist. Thank you for that, Andrew. And we actually met because we were both spokespeople for the Block Cop City mass action movement, sort of honestly the Hail Mary of the Stop Cop City movement, trying to just jumpstart this movement 8 months after they killed our comrade Tort.
Oh yeah.
And we met, I was on the West Coast doing tour stops. So we had like a speaking tour where we were driving around the country, inviting folks to come all the way to Atlanta to participate in this mass nonviolent action. And we hit like 80 cities. And I was on the West Coast while Jamie was doing a tour on the East Coast. And we were both doing it like alone in our cars, like driving from venue to venue. And, I thought I did a lot of tour stops. I did like 15 or something. The only person who did more was Jamie Peck. And we met for the first time in Atlanta, getting ready to go try to block Cop City. And then a few months later, Jamie was like, you want to start a podcast? And thus Party Girls was born.
Well, speaking of Cop City, actually, and then we'll go to the DMs, but speaking of Cop City, you're both Cop City activists, and 42, I believe, activists were charged last year with domestic terrorism. And I want to know if you saw a connection between the effort to charge Luigi with terrorism and the movement to charge Cop City activists with similar charges, even though obviously the Cop City people didn't kill anyone, which Luigi is being accused of doing. None of the Cop City people are accused of killing anyone. But yeah, do you see a connection there?
I mean, it's like, it's back to this sort of point that Jamie raised so punctually on the Cuomo thing, right? So the terrorism is about it inflicting terror, right? Like that's the crux of the whole argument, right? Linguistically and otherwise. And like what these domestic terrorism charges against these forest defenders, like these people trying to prevent a forest from getting cut down and turned into a violent police training center where they can practice urban warfare techniques to oppress the black proletariat, and people are trying to prevent that from happening. They're being called a terrorist. And it's like, whose fear matters in this country? It's not the fear of the normal Joe Schmo. It's not the fear of poor and working class people. It's not the fear of anybody except the wealthiest elites that seems to be centered and foregrounded. So just like, and we see this, like, it's just like the galloping corruption. I mean, you had talked about sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on YouTube. You're talking about Eric Adams, like trading his freedom for the potential freedom of migrants to Donald Trump in order to get his charges dropped so that he can focus on deporting people, essentially, right? And meanwhile, they're trying to lock people up for preventing a forest from getting cut down. And it's like the relationship between the two. It's like when there's a movement that's so potent, when there's an act or a movement that's so potent, that's so resonant, that's so on the nose, that it has the people in power just trembling, just shaking in their boots. Like, we read between the lines, we know exactly what's going on, and we offer a crystal clear explanation and an action that you can do to follow it. And like, that's what the Stop Cop City movement was about. You fast forward to today, and Luigi's alleged to have killed literally the most powerful healthcare CEO in the world, right? And people in power are just terrified. I mean, it's like we're at a watershed moment in this country, right? Where it's like things are either going to get better if people band together, or things are going to continue to get worse. And the minute that somebody stands up, in the case of activist movements or otherwise, and tries to put their foot down and say, we're not going to let things get worse anymore, they get the book thrown at them.
Mm-hmm. Right. What about you, Amy? Amy, what the hell? Jamie, sorry.
Well, I do think it's very concerning that the state is using laws designed to go after the mafia. And, you know, I am an abolitionist at the end of the day, but if these laws are appropriate for anyone, it's for actual organized crime syndicates, right? They're using these laws in order to go after whoever they want, right? And a lot of the time, that's going to fall on the most vulnerable people in society, and it's going to fall on activists. And we've seen the misapplication of RICO charges in the case of Young Thug as well, which is another high-profile case in the state of Georgia. In fact, for a time, the same the same prosecutor's office had 3 RICO cases, and it was Donald Trump, the Forest, yeah, I said that wrong. Donald Trump, Young Thug, and the Forest Defenders. There we go.
Wow.
And that's patently absurd. I looked into the Young Thug case a little bit as well, and it's of obvious violation of First Amendment rights. It feels incredibly racist as well, because no one ever charged Johnny Cash with RICO for saying I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die, right? Everyone understands that as a work of art. But when it's a hip hop artist, all of a sudden you're confessing to your murders over a beat, and this is admissible evidence. So one of the best lines that people liked in my speaking tour stops was when I said, you know, we at Stop Cop City, needless to say, we stand in solidarity with Young Thug. We do not stand with Donald Trump.
Nice. Yeah. Good.
He's
line
on
in
his
the
own.
sand. Yeah, that's a good
But,
idea. Yeah. They also have used RICO with the Bronx 120, which is like this it's a prosecution, a totally illegal, unjust, like constitutional rights violating case against a bunch of people who have very tangential relationships to a gang. And they used a RICO case to basically criminalize everyone who has anything to do with anyone, who has anything to do with any crime that was ever committed, basically. So yeah, we know that the criminal justice system is frequently weaponized.
Before we got to Jamie's tea, I was just wondering, would this was a thought that I had, and just wondering if you think this is valid or you would agree with it, or if I'm mistaken, let me know. But just visually, it struck me, here we have an image of Daniel Penny, who murdered a homeless person in New York City, and this was what they would refer to as a perp walk. In his
that
instance,
person was Jordan, the 30-year-old Jordan Neely, by the way, unarmed.
Right, and murdered a homeless man. And this is the perp walk for Luigi, also alleged, accused of, ending a single person's life. But it just struck me the visual discrepancy, the visual difference in how the state responds to that. If it's a person that in the eyes of the state has no value, versus who they think are quote unquote real people or valuable people, and the difference in response there. Would that be a valid observation, or do you think I'm kind of,
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, you didn't see Eric Adams at the perp walk of Daniel Penny, now did you?
Right.
But I do think, unfortunately for the state and unfortunately for the prosecution, I do think that ridiculous stage perp walk may have backfired and made Luigi look incredibly Christ-like in the eyes of many.
It was so dumb. I remember, and also like it kind of reminded me, not to compare them, since we already have had an offensive analogy between Israel Palestine, what's happening here, but it did remind me a little bit of like Israel not getting the PR foul that they committed when they released the footage of Sinwar. Like the parallel is that these people are so out of touch that they don't even realize that they're releasing propaganda that serves their enemy.
Yeah. But do you really think they really are out of touch and they really don't get it? Or do you think that they know, but they literally can't actually come out and say that on air or publicly, because then you would then have to address the extreme toxicity, the cruelty, the brokenness that is the system, and they're not going to do that. So they
I'm missing like the binary that you're presenting.
Like if they were to acknowledge that, rather than being like, why is everyone sympathetic with this person? Like, who knows? I've got no idea how they could possibly, feel that way. Like, if they acknowledge that they understood, then they would have to talk about, oh, well, then why are all of these people so upset? And talk about, the, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of people that die every year because these, MFers decide to deny people's, life-saving medicine and treatment and whatnot. Like, they would have to talk about that. Like,
well, I think you can just be I think that they could think that the question is like whether they're doing something that serves their interest or not. And I think that when people are entitled and have the power of the state on their side, they don't necessarily, they're not very good at understanding how other people see them or how the other people see things.
Totally.
And like with Israel and Sinwar, right? Like they are so racist and they see Palestinians as so dehumanized that they don't realize that for anyone who doesn't have that toxic view, seeing a man with an arm blown off, like fight till the end, is actually not a sign of like weakness and pathetic loserdom, but rather a sign of like major strength and fortitude and courage that these people could not even have for a second.
Right.
I think you're absolutely right. And this ridiculous staged perp walk just shows how incredibly out of touch these people are. It also kind of reminds me of when folks like Jesse Waters, I feel like I need to put some disrespect on that name.
We have that clip.
When folks like Jesse Waters say that they think that Luigi is going to get I don't know, violence done to him in prison, as if people in prison would care that somebody is accused of killing a CEO.
I feel like Jamie just perfectly set that up.
Yeah, well, we actually have that clip. Let's take a look at that clip, and then maybe we'll save the tea for the very end. Maybe that can be our Patreon only segment. But let's see. Let's take a look at Jesse Waters from Fox News. Let's watch his statement about Luigi, and then Brad. After that, of course, let's do the follow up.
Yep.
And good, he's got it. Now he's a prep school kid. He's politically connected in Maryland.
He's ready for prison?
I don't think anyone's ready, Brian. Maybe you are, Brian, in a different way. But this guy's not ready. He's way too soft. He's going to get annihilated on the inside. And good. If he's not going to get the death penalty, maybe someone will do him justice behind bars. That's all I have to say about that.
You should stop there.
Right.
He has no it's my understanding, and this I'm getting this from like Twitter and from like Reddit and from people who like have contacts inside of MDC that are other than Luigi Mangione.
Prison,
they've got the prison in Brooklyn that he's being held in. They've got his back on the inside.
Oh yeah, of course.
I mean, you don't get a good haircut in prison if people don't like you.
Yeah, exactly. It's a nice fade going on right now. Yes. But that's another example of how out of touch. It's like you're just showing that you have no objectivity whatsoever. Like it's one thing for you to hate this guy, for one thing for you to like want him to be taken out, but to pretend that that's a likelihood. Again, it goes back to the thing we were talking about with Chris Cuomo. Like there's a difference between a moral perspective and just facts on the ground. Like what on earth would make you think that this person was going to be threatened by people in prison, unless he happened to be in a jail cell with like a CEO from
Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Yeah, exactly. Which unfortunately is very unlikely because those people never get in trouble, if only. But let's take a look at some evidence that I'm sure Jesse Waters would be really shocked by. And what is he? He's soft, this guy. I mean, you don't have to like what he did. He's not soft. He like shot a guy in the street. And I don't think Jesse Waters ever does anything like that. Okay, let's take a look at this this clip.
Interaction. Take a look from earlier today.
Luigi's conditions suck! Free Luigi!
So there you go.
Dan, that's coming from inside the
Yeah.
prison.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, it's not like that was so obvious and predictable. Like, who would have thunk someone like this is a guy who, again, people from both sides of the aisle, not elected officials, but like the people in the streets, people who are Republican or Democrats, who are leftist or super right wing, are all united in like defending or understanding what this guy has done.
Yeah.
And
I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah.
Well, and,
It really
and I would just say, like, just what the allegation is, even the allegation gives him that sort of support. I mean, I can't imagine, that, as Jamie put it so well, like, who's to say? The jury is still out, but, you know, prior to even knowing whether or not there's any validity to those claims, he gets that kind of support.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really not that often that you see the discourse in this country show any signs of realigning itself from this left-right culture war to a bottom-up class war.
Yes.
And
exactly,
when that happens, we need to seize upon those moments. And we don't get to pick what that happens around, but it's happening now. And I think the organized left as such would be really foolish to ignore it.
So is that kind of, I feel like is a response to one of Cuomo's questions, right? Like, why this guy? He comes from money. Why are you fundraising from him? And it does seem like it's a very important, like a consciousness raising opportunity. Can you
Like,
guys speak to that?
Luigi's alleged actions and the ripple effects that caused created cracks in the veneer of our polite society. And like, as revolutionaries, one of the things that we always have to do is keep abreast of these cracks as they appear, because they appear in moments, right? They appeared when Trump's legitimacy was threatened in 2017 and the anti-fascist movement was popping off. They appeared during Standing Rock. They appeared in Ferguson. They appeared during George Floyd. They appear over and over and over again, these cracks in our society. And our goal has to be to inhabit those cracks and prevent them from closing. So it's like, I have two primary operations with all of this. One is that Luigi walks, because that's what America wants. And two is that this binding spell that has been broken in this country, and obviously the conversation about how messed up the American for-profit healthcare system is not a new conversation, right? That would be a disservice to the people who have been saying that for a long time and to all of us who have been experiencing it for all of our lives. But it re-jump started that conversation in a way that of epic proportions, right? So it's like, we have to make sure that those cracks do not close, and that the system change that this conversation necessitates can be moved forward towards.
Yeah. By the way, I just want to read this comment from Philip Blair. Brian Thompson, the CEO. Brian Thompson was raised in an Iowa farm worker family feeding the world. From these heights, he sunk to a lowly medical racketeering crime boss. Yeah.
Sad.
Yeah.
Well, you hate to see it.
You really do hate to see it. Another thing that I want to bring up, by the way, is, and this goes back to the idea of Luigi's popularity. I think it's really important. Like, the death penalty is on the table at this point, right? I think that it is really important that this person gets a good defense. I think like the powers that be need to be shown that they cannot just like execute someone. First of all, I'm obviously against the death penalty no matter what. I think it's a totally heinous thing, but I think this does matter. And we all know that you have to pay for justice, unfortunately, in this country. Like, unless you luck out with an amazing, I mean, you can get someone who does it pro bono, but it's very hard to get someone to do that. But I also want to show you this clip of a doctor who made a video about something that happened to her while she was in the operating room. She's a plastic surgeon, but she works on people with breast cancer. And she released this on Instagram. And because of this, United Healthcare has now hired a defamation law firm. So let's take a look at this video that this doctor released.
2025, and
insurance just keeps getting worse. I just did 2 bilateral deeps and 2 bilateral tissue expanders for patients. And I've never had this happen before, but during the second deep, I got a phone call into the operating room saying that United Healthcare wanted me to call them about one of the patients who was having surgery today, who was actually asleep having surgery. And, said I had to call right now. So I scrubbed out of my case and I called United Healthcare, and the gentleman said he needed some information about her, wanted to know her diagnosis and whether her inpatient stay should be justified. And I was like, do you understand that she's asleep right now and she has breast cancer? And the gentleman said, actually, I don't. That's a different department that would know that information. And I was like, well, she does need to stay overnight tonight. And you have all the information with you because I got approval for this surgery. And I need to go back and be with my patient now. But yeah, it's out of control. Insurance is out of control. I have no other words.
Can you imagine?
That made me tear up. Like,
Yeah.
actually.
Right. Why doesn't Chris Cuomo have her on his show?
I wonder why.
Yeah, Chris, if you're watching this, yeah.
I mean, he regrets having Jamie on, that's for sure.
I'm sure, yeah. Well, and yeah.
Does anyone actually think that she would make that video just to make United Healthcare look worse than they do already? Like, it doesn't need any help with that.
Right.
No, they're filing frivolous lawsuits in an attempt to shut people up and keep them from talking about these problems.
Well, 2 more questions before we get to the tea, which everyone is excited for, which it's very strong now. It's really steeped. Tell us what, if anything, Luigi has communicated to you guys through his lawyers, or I don't know how he is or isn't communicating with you guys. So tell us what the deal is there.
So he wrote us saying thank you, basically. And his team got in touch with us on his behalf. The contents of this letter are, he wants them to be private, just between us, which is really sweet, actually. And we're looking forward to talking with him more.
So
But
if you had been nice, Chris Cuomo, Jamie could have respected that privacy too, your DM privacy. Anyway, keep going.
It's true. Not everybody is as pure of heart as
Yeah.
Luigi. I guess it's unfortunate. But his team contacted us to let us know that they were aware, and Luigi was aware of the fund, and that he was going to be accepting it and using it to fight all 3 of these unprecedented cases with everything he has. And despite having raised over $300,000 already, that's probably not going to be enough to cover all 3 of the cases.
Yeah. And, thank God the Democrats took their opposition to the death penalty out of the platform this year for the first time in a while. And speaking of the formidable, they didn't have it in the platform this year for the first
Why
time.
would they?
Why would they? Yeah. But speaking of the Democrats, they really are a force to be reckoned with. A lot of people are afraid of Trump, but we're in a great position, because let's hear what Speaker of the House, Hakeem Jeffries, had to say a couple months ago. Nate, was this a couple months ago, about Trump? A couple weeks ago, right? When was this?
Legislatively, we're going to fight it in the courts, and we're going to fight it in the streets.
Oh, are we? I'll follow his lead.
Yeah. Well, that's something that he's saying he would do. But then a couple days later, he had a different tune.
Trying to figure out what leverage we actually have. What leverage do we have? They control the House, the Senate, and the presidency. It's their government. What leverage do we have?
There you go. That's the man, one of the men standing apparently between us and fascism.
I mean, he's actually correct. in that second, that's my hot take, is that he's telling 110% the truth. The Democrats have zero leverage. They have forfeited all of their power to shape the nature of our reality, and they have given it to the fascists. And like, I hope that this can be a sobering moment for those who could use a nice cool splash of water on the face in order to wake up and confront the horrors that are happening right now. But like, nobody's coming to save us.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there are two things happening. One is that the Dems set this up for, like, they basically handed Trump another 4 years. And at the same time, they could do certain things that they won't do because they're obsessed with norms and political relationships and keeping things kind of sacred and not being too disruptive. And also they want to fundraise off of Trump.
Well,
Yeah.
Got to win 2026.
Yeah.
It's infuriating. I mean, they're constantly saying that Trump is a historically unique threat to democracy, and that's why they need us to donate to them immediately. But they're certainly not behaving as if he is, right? Because if that's the case, then you need to defeat him by any means necessary and defeat his agenda.
Right. Even by ending a genocide, a massively unpopular genocide, which we knew from the polls was going to be helpful to Kamala Harris, which is why all these odious pricks out there who are responding to Trump's plans for ethnic cleansing, who are for the first time upset about Palestine, they're such realists, and they need people to wake up and look at the world with a clear eye and stiff upper lip and just, make sure that we stop fascism. And yet they didn't demand that Kamala Harris do that. They didn't demand that Kamala Harris not prance around with the Cheneys. They didn't demand that Kamala Harris look at the numbers and decide that she had to change policies when it came to Palestine, and had to depart from Joe Biden, even though it was rude of her to do that. And she didn't want to do that and break those norms. Anyway, but I do want to, I think everyone is chomping at the bits to hear the DMs from Chris Cuomo. Thank you so much. If you're watching this now, you saw this whole thing live. If you're watching this later and you want to see this full stream, which you definitely do, we got some real gems. You get to hear Jamie Peck reading her DMs from Chris Cuomo. You get to hear, what else do we do in the Patreon only section? We watch Hakeem Jeffries. We make fun of the Dems. We talk about the way that the law is weaponized against the most vulnerable. All of those things are fun. They probably don't sound as fun as the DMs, but they're all great. So go to patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Yes, free Richard Medhurst. In fact, I'm going to have to make sure I talk about that next time. I want to have him on. There are complications in that I won't get into. But yes, free Richard Medhurst. Will have to report on that soon. And yes, we are going to have Whitney Webb on. We're going to have Whitney Webb on. We have a bunch of great guests coming up. We have we have John Kiriakou, the great CIA whistleblower, Nathan Tankis, who has done amazing work on Elon Musk and the Treasury Department, Helena Cobbin of Just World Books, who's published these webinars and book on understanding Hamas. So all these people. And yeah, we'll have Blakely on again. And they did get their channel demonetized. That's messed up. Okay. Like the stream, subscribe. Thanks for getting us to 250,000. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Phantomus Fanta. And thank you, Nate, for the research. All right. And thank you to all the guests. Bye, everyone.
Okay, I'm down. You got limits, man. You got limits, man.